Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Good of Twitter. I'm your host, Troy Goldenberg. I'm here with Michael Elgort. We got to speak a tiny bit before we started, and we were about to hop into his journey and his story, his biography a little bit. So I'm excited to get into it. Michael, thank you for coming on. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you for having me. So as you said, we've started to discuss a bit about myself. So I'll just briefly talk about my biography. I was born in what is now Far East Russia. It's a region that people mostly know. Like if they're not Jews, they know about city called Vladivostok, so that area. But I wasn't born there. I was born a bit to the north. It's a city called Khabarovsk. Then I moved to Birobidzhan, where my father is from, and I spent my childhood there. So my original first tongue is Russian, so I do speak Russian quite well, I suppose. And But then my grandparents, they are from Ukraine, Western Ukraine specifically. So I spent a lot of time going back and forth, and I've been there. So I also speak Ukrainian. I'm not really good at it. I understand quite well, but I don't speak really well. And yeah, I lived in Far East of Russia. I then moved by Ukraine to Moscow. I did my legal degree there. I'm a Master of Law from Moscow Academy of Law. My specialty is international law, and my thesis was on terrorism and its influence on political decisions. But I was mostly working on terrorism in Russia because it was like I was Russian Jew
Yeah,
living in Russia.
yeah.
So that was my primary topic. Then I moved to Israel about when it's already 16 years ago. Wow. Yeah, 16 years ago. I did a program called Academime, which is people with specific degrees, like engineers, doctors, or lawyers, are going through a specific process, and they acquire the same profession in Israel. So I became Israeli lawyer already like 15 years ago, 40 and a half. And I used to work in a company called Moshe Bloomfield Kaba Baker, which one of the partners is a relatively important figure, in my opinion, here for our topic as well, because he used to be one of the negotiators for Oslo Accords, and he is a former ambassador of Israel to Canada. And he also served in several other positions, like in UK as well. So he was my mentor. He was my sort of immediate superior. So we were working on several projects together, and from that area, I started to be more interested in terms of legal structure, of how Israel operates, what is framework of different parts of Israel, or let's say former mandate Palestine are. And then I did my army service. I mean, that's part of the program that you do academia, that you are allowed to defer it for a bit, like before you acquire a profession. Then when you acquire a profession, you can go to army.
Hmm.
And I did my army service because I was already older than 18 years old. It's shorter. It's 1 year army service. So I was an engineering force, which is not really compatible with law, but that's what army has decided to do. Um, I came back. I worked as a lawyer for a bit more, for about 2.5 years. Then I did MBA in France. I moved to France in 2014, and I studied in a business school called INSEAD. And it has two campuses, one in France, in Fontainebleau, the other one in Singapore. And that's how I ended up in Singapore. So I then finished my graduation there, and I stayed in Singapore, and I worked in Singapore 5 years in consulting. And I did work for a local company that worked in trading and seafood trading specifically. And then I moved to work with a company that were doing restructuring for them as a turnaround consultant. And I worked at that for two and a half more years. And well, during COVID, I was stuck between two countries. Like I was on the business trip when it happened, so I couldn't go back to Singapore. So I went back to Israel, and I was working for a year and a half out of Israel, and then yeah, I recently left. So like 4 months not working for them anymore. I still maintain my previous accounts for the customers, but I'm kind of on the exit right now, on my way out. And simultaneously, I've been in touch with my former bosses in my from my legal life, with my lawyer's life. So yeah, and we've been discussing a lot about what's going on, obviously, with the current war and overall with how Israel is perceived. So, I mean, again, I'm a lawyer. I have as your podcast says, a Twitter, right? So it's not Twitter anymore; it's X, and it's a hellish website that actually soaks you and consumes a lot of your time, like especially for when you do doom scrolling and going through news, same as TikTok, probably any other web platform. So yeah, this is in brief about myself. So yeah, we can dive in any specific areas.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of topics to dive down there. That's a very impressive resume. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I'm 37.
Oh, well, you look very young. I was like, dang,
I
he
know.
did this many years in Ukraine, this many years in France, this many. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
it's a very impressive resume. It's super cool.
Trust me, because I was doing restructuring work in Central Asia. One of the reasons why I started to actually grow facial hair is because they couldn't believe I actually am coming to do restructuring. They thought I'm like a sort of, I don't know, like a young dude just coming over, I don't know, to bring delivery or something. So I
Yeah.
had to actually grow facial hair because
Oh, that's
well, it's a
hilarious.
good it's a good thing, it's not bad. Being young looking is actually an advantage in my opinion.
Yeah, no, especially as the years go on, more and more, it would definitely be more an
Correct.
advantage.
Correct.
Yeah, there's a lot of topics I want to jump down, but I would love to start early in that process with you. Your thesis paper was on terrorism, and that was
Yeah.
in Russia. I don't know a lot about that. I mean, obviously, I've read about Ukraine at this point and Georgia. Yesterday, actually, Russia even claimed the sale of Alaska was illegal. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So
That's a regular thing, especially now before the elections in Russia. They usually invoke stuff like that in order to gain more popularity or traction among hardcore Russians that say we need to restore the whole empire. So that's how it works there.
So on the terrorism though, I don't know a lot about terrorism in Russia. Is that a big problem still? Is that something that affects certain parts of the region, or what made you interested in studying that in particular?
Well, when I did my thesis and actually when I studied in university back then, Russia was in the Second Chechen War, and so basically what happened in '90s, Russia decided not to cede any more territory to any other national republic as it did in 1992 when all the former Soviet republics collapsed, right, and like former republics became countries. There were other former republics that were part of Russia, but they were also republics, and they wanted some sort of independence, like Chechnya, Ingushetia, so this region in northern Caucasus. And because initially it was a sort of a civil conflict, there was not terrorism involved. But then essentially, because for some very particular reasons, it's a very long topic in itself, a lot of people from all over the world, from Afghanistan, from Jordan, from Egypt, from Iraq, started to pour in and start to support independence in Chechnya. It gradually shifted from being a civil conflict in Russia to sort of religious conflict when it turned in a bit between a local Muslim population, which was definitely oppressed by overall Russia, and Russian army, which in fact was comprised of a lot of people, including Muslims as well, but it was perceived as a sort of a big Christian force trying to suppress small country. And that's when the rise of terrorism in Russia began, in a sense. There were a lot of terror attacks across Russia, and then there were explosions, and the houses were exploded. Like in Moscow, there was a huge terror attacks, like in cities called Volgodonsk, in other cities, they in Rostov as well. Basically, what happened is there were suicide bombing, there were explosions of houses, and there were tens or sometimes hundreds of victims. Two major terror attacks actually happened during the Second Chechen War. Exactly when I was doing my thesis, it was Nordost. It's the name of a play that was in a theater that was taken over by, I recall, about 70 or 60 terrorists, and they promised to execute people if their conditions are not met. So there was a failed operation to save them, and a lot of people died. I think it was 2003, correct? And then in 2004, it was even more terrible terror attack. It was on in Beslan, a city in North Ossetia, also one of the Caucasus region, when terrorists took over a school. And there were almost 1,000, I think more than 1,000 actually, hostages there, and a lot of people were killed because, again, Russian army tried to liberate, and it went south, and all went wrong. Anyway, so basically, why I was interested is because back then, Russia was, I would say, it wasn't a democracy, but it was like, okay, it was not perfect, semi-democracy, let's put it like that. So you were allowed to be vocal about things that are happening. Now it's absolutely impossible. It's a dictatorship, I would say. So under pretext of these two big terror attacks, what Russian president and the parliament as well supported him did is he started to shift politics from being democratic to more authoritarian. So he canceled elections of governors in every region in Russia and turned it into something new. He started to appoint governors. So that's a big shift. So independence of particular republic or a particular region just vanished. And then it had nothing to do with terrorism, but I actually was tracking how terrorism and use of it, because it was used for political gains, essentially, can shift politics into a very complicated direction. How basically valid topics of security can be turned into something that can, drive away the entire country from democracy to something else. And that's what essentially happened. I mean, like 15 years after that, or 20 years after that already, we can actually see how gradually it happened in Russia. And now Russia is absolutely not a free society. And I think one of the topics I've discussed with my mentor, Alan Baker, about that is that we had concerns about current government of Israel, that they are sort of mimicking, in a sense, not 100%, the same, but mimicking in the sense what Putin was doing when he took a hard stance on terrorism and explained everything by security, because essentially he failed on security because there were a lot of terror attacks. And then the same happened here. Bibi and the government failed on security. They cannot undo it already. That's already an established fact. And so we ended up in a position where Israel right now in a sort of junction where to turn and what to do in terms of who will guide the country after the war. And so there are some similarities in that.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the terrorism from around 2000, 2005 in Russia, that caused a huge political change, and it went more from, in Russia, it went more from a democracy to a more authoritarian type government system. Is that correct?
Yeah, Russian government became more repressive. So under different measures that were implemented, like gradually they said that, okay, you are not allowed to gather without, for example, getting a preliminary approval from the government, because it can be, like dangerous. We need to bring police forces to protect you. So it was 15, 16 years ago, it kind of made sense because, there were attempts to do suicide bombing and stuff like that in large gatherings.
Yeah.
But now, like, if you try to do a gathering in Russia right now, you actually cannot do it because you need to get an approval first, and they just won't give you. So they just kill the. You still have the constitution that says you're free to gather, but now you kind of physically cannot do it, right? So text says, but and it can happen in any country. Essentially, within one generation, we can easily see how the transition happens.
Yeah, no, it's one of the things I started to learn about more. Ronald Reagan is an old famous president here. He's a quote, one of his more famous quotes, I'd say. I'm going to mess it up a tiny bit, but it goes something like, freedom is not guaranteed from generation to generation, is not passed down in the bloodstream. It must be fought for and protected and passed on to our kids to do the same. And something that I've seen, again, I'm definitely more of an expert in Israel and the Middle East. That's kind of what I've studied a ton. Like every day I'm listening or reading something to learn more of the past 4 years or so. And it's what I've seen in basically the entire Middle East, which is very sad to say, but Iraq, Iran, all these places, they a generation ago when I studied them in the 50s to the 70s even, it was so different. And terrorism was obviously playing its role. But I want to focus on your experience in Russia and what you studied and all of that. Now, all of a sudden, unfortunately, is very, very relevant post October 7th world. So I'm very interested to hear like your thoughts on. I know it's just your predictions. I'm not asking you to predict the future at all, but from what you can tell, because you have a very unique experience here, what is the future Israel going to look like post Hamas? I mean, I want to say in a post Hamas world versus, who knows how long a war with Hezbollah could happen or whatever's going to happen in the future with other players.
I mean, I definitely don't want to predict anything. I hope that democratic structure of Israeli state will prevail over any attempts from anyone, whether it's from Netanyahu's government or any other government that comes to undo its achievements, but at the same time will sort of manage to take it through this complicated period. I think the first and the most important issue is actually to sort of deal, quote unquote, with Gaza in a sense that we need to understand, by we I mean like Israelis in general in the country, how to actually help them, because we, like, whatever Ben Gvir or anyone like that says that we can just move them away or do anything crazy with their talking. It's actually absolutely implausible and absolutely irrelevant, because we know that the government won't do it, in the sense that we as a broad public. But I don't see actually right now any meticulous plan of how to finish the war, integrate population there properly, in a sense of integrating them in the Middle East back, right? Because the entire area there is just in ruins, more or less. There's no economy there. There's no anything. And I think I can actually use my mentor here, because we've been discussing this and we outlined a couple of principles how to first deal with Gaza. And once we manage to deal with Gaza, then what we can do in terms of our own country. Because the first thing, obviously, that's like a part of the war, that Israel needs to sort of win over Hamas. And obviously, you cannot destroy ideology. It never happens. No one can destroy Hamas as ideology. No one can destroy Zionism, whatever people say, and there's no way anyone can destroy ideology. Ideologies die out when there is no reason to sustain it. Then they die out. So but you can actually destroy organization. So you can destroy military, political, organizational structures, and ISIS as an ideology still exists. It doesn't pose the same danger as it used to. I mean, it still does to some people, and it still does atrocities, but it's not on the same level as it used to. And basically, the same goes with Nazism or post-Soviet communism, right? They're still there. There's still people who adhere to those ideologies, but they're sort of marginal, and they're not in the central political arenas in most countries, anyway. So once Israel is capable of finishing Hamas military and political structure in Gaza, then we can actually proceed to second stage. And in a sense, I think hopefully Israel will adopt something like a Marshall Plan. You know what's Marshall Plan, obviously, for Europe. So I can
dive into that. Dive into that, actually. What is a Marshall?
So Marshall was U.S. Secretary of State after World War II during Truman's government, and he proposed a way of how the country can be reintegrated into economy and how it can be navigated through a very complicated post-war period in order to first build economy and then free society. So that's how you kind of gradually progress from being not free country into free country. And in a sense, Gaza is not a free country. It's not a country anyway, but it's like an entity that is ruled by a belligerent, I hate this word, I always mess it up. Belligerent, yeah, belligerent group. So what happens is that you sort of need to create framework for people to live and prosper there somehow and rebuild. And for that, well, first of all, you need to get rid of Hamas, and not just in the political or military structure, but there are a lot of people who used to work for Hamas or used to be in Hamas. So there's a thing that was applied in Germany and then in post-Soviet countries. It's a special framework that's called lustration. It's a legal framework, so it means that if you are not personally involved in atrocities, you were not part of Nazi Germany or like party, Nazi party, or you were not in the Communist Party, but you were still, state official, or you were in charge of any decision making. Then, for example, you are not allowed to be a judge. You're not allowed to be a governmental official. You can still do business. You can still, do any other activities, just not governmental. You cannot be in charge of political situation anymore. So this part of framework should be implemented, and I haven't actually heard anyone talking about that at all. And then
actually, that's a very simple. Sorry to interrupt you real quick. I'll let you finish that, but I do want to point out that's a good idea. It's a very simple idea. I mean, simple at least in theory. And what's frustrating for me when I have all these conversations, I would say actually, I mean, I'm a human being and I have some arrogance in myself. So I think my conversations are productive if more people heard them. But when in the grand scheme of the conversations, you don't hear these simple ideas being talked about. You just hear this is genocide, and this is let's focus on solutions. I mean, there's obviously gonna be lies, and there's like this whole other war is gonna be happening, so propaganda war. But you don't really hear solutions like that. And the Marshall Plan, I have not heard anyone else talk about this, and I'm plugged into this discourse, as you probably know. So yeah, it's a great idea. It's a great idea. I'm excited to start putting that going forward.
Yeah. So basically, if we go through the Marshall Plan in a sense, what Israel also needs to do in a sense, it needs to create sort of a new register for Gaza's Strip citizens, and it's actually very important for a couple of reasons. We can touch it a bit later, but first, the first reason is that you actually can count who are there and how many people are there just to help them. You need to understand how many of them, because there are some still under rubble. There are some civilians who are killed. There are some civilians who are displaced. So there's a lot of mess, and you need to account for these people, because essentially if we're destroying Hamas, there will be no government, quote unquote, government there. So somebody needs to fill the void, and that means that temporary administration, like what is Kogat, I think we have it right now, it's military, but there should be something civilian as well. So you need to create a register. And the first thing that they need to do, they need to account for everyone who is in Gaza and who actually was affected by the war, because essentially they're still affected by the war. It's civilian population. You need to account for that. And so once you do that and you create a civilian administration, the next step is that you sort of need to begin create infrastructure for some people to return. Because what we know, if I remember correctly, yesterday I read that for now, for 2 or 3 months, Israel will not allow anyone to return to northern Gaza. And it's sort of a good idea because, first of all, there's a lot of rubble and there's a lot of potentially booby traps and stuff like that. There will be more civilian casualties if they return. But at the same time, they're still clearing the area from Hamas members, and they're still searching for some civilians from Israel who are held there potentially. We don't know exactly. So the time is needed, but then you need to sort of put field hospitals there if you're allowing them to return, because you need to treat people. You need to bring supplies there, so you need to sort of create a line to supply civilians through. And as complicated as it sounds, when you create a new registry, you give them new documents or create a new type of documents for them. Let's say Gaza Strip resident, whatever, affected by war. Then you sort of need to count how much money you need to get from outside of Israel, because Israel cannot supply all the population on its own account. So for that, you definitely need international aid. You need support from countries that are now friendly with Israel, like United Arab Emirates, even not friendly, it's like Saudi Arabia or Turkey.
You don't have to be friends to
yeah,
work
I mean, so you need to create initial infrastructure for them to return and survive. It won't be an easy life. It will be a very complicated life, but they need some temporary place to live. They need food and they need medical care. Because Israel takes over Gaza, will definitely under international law fall under Israel right now, because still there is Hamas government. It's still kind of supposed to care for its own citizens, but once it completely eradicated or is not capable of doing that, then it falls on the occupying, because what Israel will do is the occupation of Gaza. So yeah, and then after we do illustration, after we do the register, after we do the civil administration, you actually have to find local people who can be liaisons from the local population, because you need to create sort of a framework for them to govern themselves. You can govern them, but they will need to. So sort of some mechanism for that as well is it's very complicated thing to do, because some people will perceive it as collaborators or stuff like that, but somehow you need to find someone, because it's very hard to care for 2.3 million people, subtract whoever is killed, but then still there's a lot of people left. And then the last part is to sort of create a reconstruction fund, which will this part once the war is over, I think it's manageable, because I already heard there's like a lot of donor countries like Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, Saudi Arabia as well. Also, all the Western countries, like you said, Germany, France, even Japan, are willing to cash in and provide finance to rebuild. I think another important part is actually to avoid giving it to United Nations, because whatever United Nations does is problematic, because it's just a bureaucratic organization that simply wants to sustain itself, in a sense. So whatever you do with United Nations, whenever you start to finance United Nations, it will just grow bigger, but it won't solve the problem, right? So unless there is a direct decision to do it. So there should be a special fund that is created from all these organizations around the countries, or even from participation of UN, but UN and UNRWA shouldn't be guiding force here. And that's also a very important part, because if UNRWA is allowed back and will continue to do what it did, we will just get another Hamas, just under different name.
Exactly.
It won't help. I think actually, and I haven't seen anyone proposing it, I think bringing countries like UAE or Bahrain to actually navigate this process, including bringing their study materials, for example, for schools and something like that, is a very important step, because like I remember in 2022, I read that for only 2 or 3 years in Emirates, they changed their curriculum in schools about Israel and Jews, and the level of anti-Semitism dropped significantly, because perceptions and ideas about who are Jews, what they do and why they do like that, it started to change, because they actually started to read more about who our Jews really are, and reduce the level of myth about that. and it actually helped gradually, not
Of
immediately, but
course.
gradually. And I think these countries will navigate this process. It will actually help, because especially given that they're allies with Israel, and they are definitely allies with Palestinian Authority or in any other organization that is there. And once the process of rebuilding starts, what should be done is actually, I think, it should concentrate on building, construction, and infrastructure projects, because it's a lot of work, and it actually creates a lot of jobs. And the biggest problem in Gaza is that they don't have jobs. Second, you have a job. How can you actually know that you have security in your job and you're not, under threat of being kicked out or anything? And actually, the level of terrorism will gradually fall lower. I mean, that's a very natural process, and it happened in many other countries. And I think that would ideally should happen in Gaza. And then, like, long-term reconstruction, maybe 5-7 years, and then after that, Israel should cede the territory to whatever local grassroots organization that started to grow from that, under guidance of UAE, even of Saudi Arabia, because I mean, it's not a democracy as well, but if there are several players with their own interests, they will actually balance themselves, and potentially can create a society where still be a lot of prejudice against Jews or prejudice against Israel, but essentially what makes any society healthy, that they will concentrate on themselves rather than on their neighbors. Second, they will start to think more about what they want to achieve in terms of economy, in terms of prosperity, and I think we'll be fine. Even if we still hate each other, or don't like each other, it will pass. French and German hated each other for centuries.
Yeah,
more or less fine right now.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great example. I think the French are a great example, because France and Germany hate each other. Britain and France still hate each other, but they work together. They work in your own interest, which is it's been one of my personal blame. I mean, obviously there's history going back to, I mean, you could say 3,000 years, you could say 1880, you could say 1920, but like there's history of hatred on both sides. But in my opinion, the big hindrance has really been a focus on your neighbor rather than yourself, from the Palestinian side. And Dr. Wilf, who I spoke with earlier a couple weeks ago now at this point, her big thing is always, they have to accept that there's going to be a Jewish state of Israel on the other side, on the Palestinian side. And once that happens, everything else is detail. I haven't heard the detail laid out as well as you just put it. I think it's incredibly well put. I was just on a space call. My internet went out, so I missed a lot of it. But I was on a space call the other day with John Aziz and a group of, I don't want to say activists, but just interested people. And they put together a document of, hey, here's what we want future Gaza to look like. And they were talking about a lot of these things. It was not laid out this well. I think this is just a very step-by-step, makes sense approach. And again, it's these simple steps that I just don't hear a lot in the conversation.
It did work historically. Like we have actually examples like that in Japan and in Germany and Austria. Like in Japan, it's very simple example of people who were really there was a lot of hatred, for example, for Chinese in Japan or Korean, and obviously for non-Asian, like Americans or whatever other. And I mean, they're still have a lot of prejudice in Japan. It's a very nice country. I love it a lot. I've been there a couple of times, but they still have prejudice. But 60, 70 years after, 80 already years after World War II, it's actually completely changed in terms of, like, it's prosperous. It has already army, and no one is actually scared that they will use their army against any neighbors. It's just for a simple fact. Essentially, when you reach specific level of prosperity and you are more interested in economy, army itself is more for defense than offense, because borders in itself begin to not matter. Like, it doesn't really matter if you live in a village in Czech Republic or in Germany or in Switzerland nearby or in Austria. Just matters for you, like, in terms of maybe taxes, but in terms of border itself, doesn't really matter because it's like unified area, right? The same goes like if you live in Singapore or okay, Hong Kong not a good example anymore, but Singapore, Japan, South Korea, it doesn't really matter. The borders are merely for taxation rather than actually for any other means. And the second we get these notions through to countries in the Middle East, it doesn't really matter whether Israel controls West Bank or Golan Heights or anything else, as long as there is more interest in developing economy than in anything else, because territory is just territory unless you need oil there, but we don't have oil there. But yeah. Mm-hmm. So and that's why I think the second we actually reach mutual understanding from all sides that the territory is secondary here, it's more important that we actually accept that we're staying and living here together. We'll gradually come to the notion that we can redraw map whatever we want. I mean, yeah, these stones are very important. These stones are very important. This is a sacred place. This is a sacred place that's happening throughout entire history. But essentially, like, doesn't really matter anymore for people, let's say in Europe. I don't know, like you take okay, maybe not a good example, but like Balkan countries, they're gradually moving away from that. But like there were different parts, let's say, of Bosnia that were important for Croatia and vice versa. And they, they survived and now they moved on. And now they have border, but like maybe in the 20, 30 years, there will be no border and it doesn't really matter. You have important places for your nation in the other region, in the other country. Just go there and visit. Doesn't really matter if it belongs to your administration or not your administration. And that's, I think, what essentially many people on Palestinian side don't understand, but also hard right guys don't understand in Israel either. So they say that what we need to do, we need to hold the territory no matter what. And I mean, there are obviously concerns like security. I'm not trying to raise it, but what I'm trying to say is that once we have a proper understanding on both sides, it doesn't really matter in terms of territory who controls it.
That makes sense. Here's where my pushback would come. And I think like everybody, when you don't know anything about this conflict, so I go back to, when I really first started learning about it, I was like 17, 18, so it was a decade ago now. But everyone starts out in this idealistic place of, oh yeah, just 2 states or 3 states, just like that. It's simple. And in America right now, even with Secretary Blinken and everyone on down, it's just parroted. You just hear it again and again and again. And I'm at a point, and most Israelis, at least from polls and my own discussions when I was there, are at a point where, hey, that's actually kind of insane. And the fact that you want to, and I see this even on like large Twitter accounts, political Twitter accounts that I enjoy, that I am a supporter of, and all of them are still just saying the same thing. It's like, it's interesting to see like people that don't dedicate all this time to understand this conflict in particular is the same exact opinion across the board. It's ignoring facts on the ground. So one of the facts on the ground that it's ignoring is we basically already had a Palestinian state in Gaza. May 12, 2005, it was a complete pullout. 11 days later, 40 rockets got sent to Sderot. Rockets were continuing to get sent into Israel. And then the Gazans elected that group. And then there's a coup and this whole thing. But basically the last 20 years, we just saw a Palestinian state, and it led to October 7th. And that's not going to be something that, in my mind at least, and in the polling mind of the Israelis, that's just not going to be something that happens tomorrow or next year or the year after that. And we're at a point in the West where they want to force it on Israel, and they want to force it on the Israeli people and on the Palestinian people, which there's not much of an appetite for a 2-state solution there either. So, and then I'll get to one more point. I'll kind of get back to you here. The people that say like we have to hold this territory, for security reasons, and there are real, again, my concern, security reasons. So it's like, for example, that Jordan River. When you look at the Trump plan for a state, it was very complex, unappealing to the eye, but it had Israel controlling that river. And then basically it was like a strip of land in the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, that would have gone to a Palestinian state. I think that's a real concern. I think like just pure geography points of, hey, we don't know what's going to happen with relations with whether it be Syria or Jordan, or even if it's just the Palestinians control that area, they get their own state, and all of a sudden, well, now they're a state, so Iran has more of a right, and it's easier for them to ship weapons through Jordan into that state, and now Israel's not controlling that border. The security. The point is, there are real security concerns. So when you say that it doesn't really matter as far as which administration holds what, that would be my pushback there. Like, do you have like what are your thoughts about that? Like, do you have a response? Do you think that's a credible like
No,
figure?
it's a very credible pushback. I do understand the validity of a security claim here because once, for example, Israel stopped controlling Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt, we got Hamas stacks of weapon. They started to bring it in enormous quantities, like via, as we know now, via Sudan, then to Sinai Peninsula, because there's a vast. What I don't understand how big Sinai is actually, and it's very easy to bring about a boat full of weapon and then put it in trucks and then just bring it to areas in Egypt where there is no presence of any forces of the Egyptian army, and then smuggle it under the ground. So, and there you have it. You have a lot of weapon being accumulated. And yesterday I just read that Israel was shocked with the quantity of tunnels. So there's like tunnel under tunnel under tunnel. So and I think it's now estimated about 500 miles, which is insane. It was an estimation before it started was 250. I think it was in December they said it's about 300, 350. Now they already estimated 500, and they still cannot actually be sure that it's the final number because they find more and more. And obviously, if Israel abandons, as of right now, like in current condition, abandons border with Jordan, no, doesn't matter that Jordanian government, in spite of all the rhetoric, is actually an ally, and they're interested in protecting and securing this interest and protecting the border. There'll still be a lot of smugglers. Even now, we have smugglers who are trying to smuggle, like hundreds of M16 pistols, ammo and stuff like that. That will be, I don't know, tenfold, even more. So absolutely valid pushback here. I would argue that what I was arguing about who runs the territory is when you actually the mindset of the political entities who are governing in both areas, let's say Palestinian Authority or whatever body comes after that, and Israel, there is more interest in economic prosperity rather than in any other activity. Then it like after some time there will be no need for heavy security on the border because there will be no incentives for population living in the West Bank to accumulate weapons. As of now, that's not a condition. We have Lions Den, we have Salafit groups, we have a lot of other guys who are very much interested to drive West Bank south, if you understand what I mean. But like, yeah. So obviously, as of now, it's absolutely irrelevant to give up security. But essentially, in a long-term period, we need to sort of somehow find a solution for that. And one of the solutions would be, first of all, I think it would, after Hamas, we can create sort of a quasi-state when Palestinians will self-govern themselves in Gaza, and we need to help them to prosper. Because you cannot actually allow people after a war to stay inside and brew there, because we have had that example. First World War, Germany lost. No one really wanted to care for population, even though they lost, and said like they need to pay reparations. They were suffering, and then when you are suffering and you are not helped, you will just grow more remorse and more hard feelings inside, and then down the road you will elect someone like Hitler, and here you go, Second World War. I would actually argue that there is no First World War and Second World War. I think it's just one World War. It's merely split it between this 25 period of time, because well, basically the First World War was not properly finished. Since it was not properly finished, and nothing was really, there were no proper mechanism to reestablish German economy, Italian economy, Russian economy, because then we had the Soviet Union erupting from that. We ended up with these crazy regimes. The same, actually, in some sort of sense, went with China when, sorry to say that, but America was so interested to rebuild in Japan that they completely forgot about China, and the Soviet Union immediately filled the void. And what they did, they just turned China in the largest Soviet republic, and now we have Chinese communist republic there, doing what what's called other communist republics are usually doing. Anyway, so going back to Gaza, if we can help them invest money, we can create a proper mechanism to reintegrate people. I think one of the important things, that's why I think the register is very important, is that actually those who went through war are entitled to sort of financial compensation and help and support, financial support, because they need to somehow, they won't be able to earn initially, because when there's no job, how do you earn? Just you need to support, but it should be sort of limited in time. And then I think very important, a very, very important framework here is that why UNRWA is not there, is that they need to stop being considered refugees, because like if you're living in Gaza and you are under this register and you're entitled to support, financial support to help rebuild, you are not entitled to further UNRWA perpetual help, because it's perpetual. That's the whole point. It will never stop. That you will be always help, but you will not work by yourself. There are no incentives, essentially, right? So then once the initial part of reintegration happens, and then other countries and companies and organizations start to invest money in Gaza, what needed to be done in order to turn it into Singapore or into Emirates, you actually need to make people wealthy enough to participate in this economy, to begin to produce, to begin to build. Once they start doing that, and then majority population is involved in that, terrorism will fall to mere marginal numbers, and then potentially cease to exist in Gaza. Once we have that, and we have a local sort of quasi-government ruling them, and Israel can walk away with a sort of understanding that now there is no need for them to do it, because they already have prospering economy, they have financial connections. There is no need for another Hamas to emerge, because people, like when you have a good steady job and you earn and you can travel and you can have decent food and you don't have security issues, unless you're a psychopath, that can happen, you won't go and do terrorism, because you're not in a sense desperate, unless you are an indoctrinating organization, but then it's a different story. And
it is different, and that's a great point. So one of my friends, I don't remember what country it was. It was a country, I want to say, in the Balkans. He's a big history buff guy himself, not necessarily Israel, Gaza, or anything like that, but just in general. He just reads all this history about all these random countries, and I wish I could remember what country he was talking about, but somewhere in the Balkans, maybe just south of Russia or something. He's like, yeah, no, they're basically a democracy now. They're a public democracy, and he's like, they just got welcomed. Like, what do you mean? Like, they just have the first elections? Like, no, they just had the first public shooting. I was like, what? Like, what kind of comment is that? And he goes, well, honestly, when you look into it, it's kind of one of those bars for freedom. And I think he was still half joking, but he eventually got to a good point. Like, it's kind of one of those bars for freedom of, like, in America, one of our biggest issues is our mass shootings, and it's an issue. But at the same time, you have the freedom to bear arms here, and you have all these different types of freedoms, and that's just going to be one of the things you have to deal with as you grow as a republic democracy, and you grow with human rights and all these things. And it sparked a very interesting conversation. My point in bringing it up, not that I necessarily agree with all of it, but it's that you're going to have psychopaths. And I think that was more so his point. Like, you're going to have these one-off events no matter what, especially when there's hatred with your neighbors, especially when there's indoctrination that's been going on for years and years and years. And that's kind of where our conversation ended up going. and it's again why I bring it up here, is that yes, like, unfortunately there's always just going to be this low level of terrorism and everything else.
I may guess here, but I think if it was recent, like about a month ago, he may be talking about Czech Republic. That was the first public shooting here in the Charles University.
I think it was Czech Republic. I think it was, and he's a huge.
There were 14 people killed, yeah, in the first massive shootout, and there was actually a guy who allegedly killed a father and a daughter in the woods about a week before that, and then he killed his own father, maybe 2-3 days later, and then he texted to his girlfriend that he's going to do mass shooting and other stuff, and I mean these are all stuff that was reported, but I'm not sure how confirmed it was what he actually did, because it's still under investigation. Just happened recently. He came to university where he studied philosophy. He was a philosophy student, and surprisingly, actually, police already encircled the building. So he went to another campus and he started to shoot out there and killed just random people, like two professors and 11 students.
That's terrible. But again, a psychopath, and unfortunately, it's just that's going to be a thing. And at the end of the day, there's just not much you can do about a psychopath. But as you were saying before, everything else you've said in this conversation, again, like I haven't heard it so just eloquently. Just like it's everything you've said to me. It's like, oh yeah, that's common sense. It's a common sense step. Like 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm taking notes. And of course, like what they really need is economic prosperity and just opportunity, safety, security, all those things, just like the Israeli people need, just like all people need. And there are steps that have been laid out in this conversation that we can take to get there. And it's going to take the right players involved. I can't agree more with you on UN and UNRWA, everything you said there on those organizations. In my opinion, are just completely part of the problem. And the players that need to be involved are Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, UAE, players that have economic and personal interest, skin in the game, and getting a thriving Gaza and a thriving Israel, and a more stable region. So, again, everything you've said to me is just common sense, and it's just a message that needs to be spread and spread and spread. It's been a great conversation. I want to keep it going at another time, maybe with more players involved. But for now, we're coming up almost on an hour here. Mm-hmm. So for a couple of questions, and I'll let you get back to your night. One would be, are there any thought leaders, books, anyone in general that you've read or that you'd like to pay attention to throughout the weeks and months that we should be paying attention to?
Well, obviously, we need to pay attention to Einat Wilf. That you already know that, because she's an amazing thought leader. I think overall, I like. Well, if we're going through specifically books, I think I'm interested to see what Sebag Montefiore will do, because I think he's working on something right now. And if you talk about the war right now, or the situation right now, or you talk about something that was written previously, just for me to understand which area are we talking about? Are we talking about right now, or like, because right now people are working on stuff like.
Let's break that into two. Let's do right now, who you should pay attention to, and maybe some books, which sounds like the route you're going on anyway. And then in general, maybe in your history, one book or something that really got to you. But let's start from now. Right now, who should you pay attention to?
Well, right now it's obviously Einat Wilf, Sebag Montefiore. I would also probably again look into people like Benny Morris. I've listened, I think, 2 or 3 YouTube videos with him recent, where he talks about this war, and in general talks about all the issues that were, happening and brewing before the war, and why it actually led to some degree to what had happened on October 7th. And I think he is rethinking a lot about his own position. It's very interesting to see that he's suddenly in the age of what he's now 70 something, evolving. It's also very interesting. I think he will make another book, and obviously I don't agree with everything he says or writes, but I think he's a very special Israeli intellectual that one needs to pay attention to. Another person that I think it's from before, and I think it's very relevant to this war, and I think I read it I think a few years ago, and I reread it earlier this year, so like last year already. It's Ronen Bergman, Rise and Kill First. It's okay. I hope he won't ever see this video. It's a very boring book. It's a very boring book, but it's very important to actually understand how Israeli mindset of Shabak, Aman, Mossad, and other organizations work, and how they were able to fuck up that badly this time, because it's actually traces how it works and how it evolves, and also it traces how Palestinian factions organization work, because it has a lot of information about Hamas, about PLO, and other organizations there, and it's so it's built in a sense tracking all the openly known, or some not that openly known, Mossad operations to destroy, kill, and target assassination, stuff like that. And it ends, I think, in 2014. He recently said that he needs to add a few more chapters to this book, because since 2014 a lot of things have happened. But if when I read it, and when October 7 happened, I just I realized that there's a lot of things that he talked there about that actually came true. So he was saying that, like, the way Israel behaved with Gaza sort of looked like a parent that is abandoning a child. I mean, and by parent I mean Israeli government, and child I mean Hamas as an organization. So they are not paying attention to Hamas. They're saying, like, we put you in your own room, do whatever you want. And then a child, in order to get attention, said, like, okay, you think I'm not your problem, I'll make it your problem. And it lit on fire the entire room, and then the entire house is just on fire. And then now it's a problem of Israeli government as well. So in a sense, the idea that was leading to October 7 actually was brewing, because, in a sense, in a part, I'm not trying to blame Israel for that, but I think the government decided to disintegrate from the matter, and it just happened to grow like a snowball, and essentially came to October 7. So I think it's a very important book, specifically for this understanding. Obviously, there's so many more. If you want, I can send it separately, but I think.
Oh, I'd love a list, actually. Yeah, it's basically all I listen to and read to.
I mean, if you want on Russia, anything, if you ever able to find, I think there is a good English translation. There is a biography of Stalin called Stalin: Life and Death, written by Edward Radzinski. In my opinion, it's one of the best biographies ever written about him, primarily because the person had access to personal archives of Stalin.
Oh, wow.
And he had a lot of opportunities to show how a person who was a terrorist, he was a terrorist initially, how he actually became a country leader, and how he turned the entire country in a dictatorship, and how that country collapsed afterwards, after his death. So it's a very interesting lifeline, and that he's tracing it, and actually there's a lot of parallels with modern world. You can see how stuff like that now happen again in Russia, when the person became a sort of dictator, and how Hamas essentially became a dictator. Like, it's not a one person, it's an organization, but essentially the principle it's kind of similar.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I don't know a lot about Stalin, but when I study like geopolitics in general, he seems to be a name that comes up a lot, as this was maybe the most important person to live in the 1900s because of how the world feared him. like the world's reaction to Stalin himself caused what a lot of people would argue. I think Peter Zane, maybe it's his name. He's one of the people that argues this, is that the whole economic world order that we were built, the U.S. built through controlling the seas, it was in direct reaction to Stalin, of our fear of Stalin, and so he's a very interesting figure to look into, and it's definitely something I'll definitely look into.
It's interesting that you said that, because I remember specifically from Rosinski book. He was in a what would become one of the Gulag camps initially, subsequently, but he was in the Tsar's jail. He was 42, and he was, and then there's a line that says, like, he wrote in a letter that he's 42. He has no future and prosperity that he thinks he can ever achieve. He has no proper family, and no one actually remembers him. So he thinks that he doesn't feel like he can do any significant contribution in his life anymore, because, like, he's already past his prime. And he was 42. It was I think 6 or 7 years before he came to power. So you see that that can quickly change, right? And then, yeah, that's true. I think one of the reasons why UN doesn't work is specifically that he was also part of the designing team, and he designed it in such a way that it basically creates a mechanism that looks democratic on surface, but absolutely doesn't work, and actually shields, let's put it like, hooligans. There is a, I think, if we still have time, like, very, very quickly. So whenever you have a hooligan in the room and a gentleman, hooligan will always do bad things, and gentlemen will just say stop doing that, right? But like when you have two gentlemen, they will agree. So that's what Stalin essentially did. He created an organization that says, if you're a hooligan, they'll say, please don't do it, please don't do it. So it's like it behaves like a gentleman that asks hooligan to stop it, and it cannot do anything. But like when there is a gentleman, then UN can actually say something, and the gentleman will adhere because he's a gentleman. So that's why democratic regimes are sort of more not obedient, but like they actually listen more to UN. You can drag them to court, like what they did in with Israel with ICJ right now. Like Russia was dragged to ICJ by Ukraine. They didn't care. They didn't care because they're the same hooligan. They just like like even like you see Lukashenko in Belarus, he can do whatever he wants. He was the last dictator of Europe before Putin became a dictator. He murdered his own people. He oppressed. He and then all UN did is like say, please stop, and that's about it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. I didn't even realize that the ICJ court order was brought to Russia. That makes a lot of sense. That would be, but yeah, the way that I view the UN, it's not even just the UN. It's actually just these worldwide organizations, even humanitarian groups in general. When it comes to Israel specifically, all it does is it shows me again and again that these humanitarian groups don't see Israelis or Jews as human. Like the Red Cross, I mean, once you learn it, you never forget it. They went to Auschwitz and they confirmed that there's no Jews dying in Auschwitz. And now you look at the Red Cross today, and they won't even go see the hostages, and they won't. And it's all, and the UN, UNRWA, all of them they're just complicit in this, and that. I mean, I'm not even complaining about it. That's one of those things I want Jews. I think Israelis understand. I think Israelis actually understand reality far better because they're forced to than diaspora Jews. I want like American Jews to realize, hey, like this is just our relationship with the world. It hasn't changed. It's not going to change. Like you can't control anti-Semitism. You're not going to talk it. You're not going to. I do believe in what I'm doing. I do believe in, talking and spreading awareness and all of these things. But at the end of the day, we'll have to feed anti-Semitism. It's not going anywhere. It's part of reality, and the UN, UNRWA, even Doctors Without Borders, and even Red Cross, and all these they're just part of it. They always have been, and there's no reason to think they won't be. So it's just there's a way we have to operate in the world, and right now I think we're at a point in time where we have to worry about ourselves. Even the most lefty people I know. So I had a friend who lived in Kfar Aza. He got killed. A lot of his family got killed. And these are the most like lefty, like, peace-loving people that you can find. And even now, when I went to Israel, I was speaking with a lot of them. It was, like, we still want peace and all these things. But like, we're at a point in time we have to worry about ourselves. Like, that's what we need to worry about. We need to worry about our friends, our family, our country. Um, and part of that is, we need to provide a good structure, civilian administration, rebuild the infrastructure, all the steps that you laid out, the restructuring fund, everything to Gaza, so they focus on economic prosperity versus their neighbors, and that is part of caring about yourself for the Israeli people. But it's something that you just don't see the world understanding. You're not going to see the world understand. So I
Yeah.
appreciate this conversation. I think this is a conversation that should be spread because, again, everything you've said, you've been able to put so eloquently. It's very simple in nature. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but the steps are simple in nature, and things don't need to be complex if you study this stuff well as you have. So, Michael, on that note, I appreciate your time. I would love to keep this going. I could go for hours and hours, but I won't make you do that. So,
Likewise,
yeah.
likewise. Yeah.
So,
Pleasure was mine.
yeah, no, let's do it again soon, and hopefully we can
Sure.
get you on with Dr. Wilf and some other voices. And I think
Yeah.
I know you're an important voice in this actually. So I'm excited to continue to get to know you and continue to talk with you, and hopefully we see good things happen over the next decade.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. It was a pleasure for me. And thank you for allowing me to speak these ideas because actually I have them more or less reading with my friends who are lawyers as well. Some of them are like NGO monitors. I've been sharing with them, and we were discussing. So they're going back and forth. I was thinking to make it as an article. I offered it to the Atlantic. They said, I asked them if they're interested in something like that because I know guys from there, and they said there's like they're working on actual existing stuff in news. They don't work on projections, so it's not relevant. But I was thinking maybe I'll use my Twitter just to publish something like a Marshall Plan for Gaza, so to speak. Article on medium.com, like on my just myself, and see
Yeah.
maybe it's of interest because, to be honest, I realize that there is a lot of separated points that are very common sense, and that were vocalized by a lot of people, by Einat Wilf, for example, by John Aziz, but like there is no integrated system. Like that should be institutional on how you do it step by step, and that's you made an important point that it should be actually quite simple because like a roadmap that you follow, and you eventually know what is the end goal here. Then again, what I hear from Netanyahu or from the government is that for now they don't have a clear understanding what is the end goal, because they say we don't want PA to govern it. Okay, but what do you want? Like you negate something, but you don't actually provide the alternative here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's fine. You don't want PA. It makes sense. They're also a specific actor that is its own interest. Offer something as another framework, and it doesn't really happen a lot. And I think if I manage to actually collect some of other points and maybe unite them into one cohesive document, we can see if it's of interest for anyone. Maybe
I think it would be. Again, there's a group. I'm blanking on the name of the group. John Aziz just met with. I'm on their email list, so I should know it. I just can't recall it at the moment. I'll look it up and send it to you though. They put together a short document. I would say imperfect, to be honest, but a short document. It's a start of what they want steps in Gaza to look like, what they want the future Gaza state, so to speak,
yeah,
to look like.
yeah.
It could use some of these. It could use some of what you're saying. So I definitely would encourage you to write that out. Put it on your own website, tweet the link, and all those things. And I would share it with them for sure. I'll forward you an email with them.
Sure, that would be very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Again, it's let's keep these conversations going. You're definitely an important voice, an important thought leader here. So again, thank you for the time. I look forward to talking with you again and staying in touch. And until then, sir, have a great night, and I'm sure I'll talk to you sooner rather than later.
Yeah, you too. Take care. It was my pleasure, and I hope to speak to you soon again.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
Good night. Good night.